No problem. So welcome everybody. We're very, very excited to have Michelle Joy join us. She recently hosted an incredible Enneagram conference, an online conference on relationships. And I hope, Michelle, that you can share the link to that conference if people missed it and want to buy it. I hope that that's a possibility. It was really great. Renata was saying how great it was the other day. So we'd really like to promote that. Such a great job. And yeah, I put up your bio here. If you want to introduce yourself, tell us a bit about your work.
Thank you. Thank you, Ingrid, and hi, everybody. I would like to start out by saying that I discovered the Enneagram when I was 19 years old, back in the mid-90s. And the very first book I opened, was Type 4, and it was incredible reading about myself. And so I had the Enneagram in my late teens. Then when I was in my early 20s, I was an intern, and I started working for two psychologists, and they were really pioneers of couples therapy. It was kind of back in the day when people were saying couples therapy really isn't going to be a thing, and they decided to trudge forward, and they came up with their own model of working with couples. So I was fortunate in my early 20s to have their model of how they work with couples and already knowing the Enneagram, and I was able to blend those two together. So I've been doing that for several decades now and have created my own approach to working with couples, and I call it the developmental Enneagram for couples, which I look forward to talking with you more about today.
Fantastic. And can you tell us who those two people were that you encountered that were formative?
Yeah, doctors Ellen Bader and Peter Pearson. They created the developmental model of couples therapy. And so I worked alongside them for over 15 years.
Wonderful.
I really
Thank you.
brought the Enneagram to their institute. So that was really neat how that worked.
Oh, amazing. And decades of clinical experience.
Yes. Yes.
So that's great.
Yes.
Yeah. So we're hoping to hear from you about some of your case studies and personal experience. And Michelle and I were talking about how we'd like to run this session. And we wanted to be quite conversational between us. I'm going to be sharing a bit about what I've learned about developmental trauma, complex relational trauma, and how I've seen that showing up in adult relationships with my clients and in my practice, and obviously my personal experience. And then hoping, Michelle, we can stop and share some of your slides along the way and talk specifically about differentiation, which
Mm-hmm.
is a big part of your work.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, going into that. So usually what we do in these sessions is we start with a presencing exercise, and then we have a breakout room for everybody to meet. We're very big on creating community and connection here, and deepening the kind of social fabric in your land. And so, yeah, let's start with the presencing exercise. And I'd like to maybe hand over to you, Renata. You always do such beautiful things. Are you happy to do one?
Yeah, sure.
Cool.
I'm just going to pause the recording.
Will you also make Michelle's co-host so that she can share slides?
I have already.
Okay. So, Michelle, I'm wondering if we should start off with what differentiation is all about and then go to the childhood patterns and things like that that I've got, because then we can reference those against what differentiation is all about and how those patterns and psychodynamics inhibit differentiation. Is that okay?
That sounds great. So in that case, I'll show two slides about differentiation, and then later we can revisit again to take it into a bit more depth.
Cool.
All right, so can I go ahead with my slide? Okay. Okay, so there's 5 different levels of development according to the developmental model, but I'm going to show 2 today, and I'll explain why. But here's the big picture, which is different psychologists talked about different stages of development that we go through when we're children. One of them is Margaret Mahler. So Doctors Bader and Pearson at the Couples Institute recognized that when we get in a relationship, we repeat the same stages that we did as children, according to Margaret Mahler's stages. But of course, as a couple, we have no idea that we're doing this. So let me show you how it works with the first 2 stages. Margaret Mahler said that when a child is between 4 weeks and 5 months old, they act as and feel as if they and the caretaker are undifferentiated or fused, like we're one. You know, apparently a child at this age can't tell the difference between me and caretaker. So we have this sense that we're one. And actually, when I talked to Dr. Dan Siegel, he talked about research that shows this actually happens sooner than 4 weeks. He talks about 8 or 9 weeks in utero. There's evidence that we have implicit memory of being in the womb, and this sense that we're one with the womb is how he worded it. So same concept as Margaret Mahler, different timings. So Doctors Bader and Pearson noticed, hey, when we get in a relationship, it's the same thing. We act and feel as if we're the same, we're one. We say things like, you complete me, etc. So we act as if me and the partner are undifferentiated or fused in that way. And we don't really notice our differences as much. We more so notice our similarities. And that only lasts up until 2 years in the relationship. And then I'll tell you what would come next. Margaret Mahler stage 2 is called differentiation, and that's when the child's between 6 and 9 months old. They do comparative scanning, what's me and what's not me. So you see things like they'll put their toes in their mouth, their fingers in their mouth, and they begin to recognize that they're a separate being. So they get that sense of who they are, the context in the world, that they have their own body, etc. In other words, they start to notice their differences. So the same thing happens in a relationship. No more than 2 years, differences become apparent. And when I'm talking about differences, I don't necessarily mean what kind of food the 2 people like. I mean a difference in perspective, you know, in terms of how they view something. And when the couple begins to notice their differences, then they begin to do one of 2 things, which usually doesn't work so well. One of them is, well, I loved being in stage number 1. It was so cozy there. It was so peaceful. It was so calm. I want to stay there. So you know what? I'm going to go ahead and give up what I want and just go ahead and merge with you. What would you like to do? So we begin to do that pattern of keeping peace. I'll give up what I want. I'll cave in quickly for a variety of reasons. And that way we can feel like we're one again because your truth will prevail. So we do that. Or the other option is, I loved it so much in stage number 1. It felt so nice when we were the same that instead of merging with you and being one that way, I'll just insist that I'm right and you're wrong. And that way, my truth will be the prevailing one, and you're going to come on my side, and we will be one unit. So we all know that those 2 approaches don't work, and yet they're very, very common in relationships. And we don't even know why we're doing it. So couples will resist moving into stage 2. They get stuck in stage number 1. Stage number 2 really entails being willing to see 2 different truths. There's yours, and then there's mine. And being willing to hold 2 subjective realities, even when we don't agree with them. So let me go on to the next slide and talk about, show you what Dr. Dan Siegel said about differentiation. First of all, he said, he referred to an integrated brain on one of his videos. He said, according to his research, the higher somebody's integrated brain, the higher their level of happiness, even their physical health, the quality of joy they feel in life. So I was curious about this, and I asked him, what leads to an integrated brain? And here's a few things that he said. He said, one of them, and this is a quote from him, It's our capacity to be engaged in relationships with other people and not lose a sense of our own individuality while having a mutually joining experience in a close relationship. So in my own words, that would be, differentiation, right? It's keeping track of who I am, knowing what's important to me and my desires, but not giving them up, not projecting them onto the other person, but knowing what belongs to me and what belongs to you, and still be able to feel joined and connected and close. He also said if someone hasn't differentiated much, they'll be very inefficient in how they process information. They may have a flood of emotions that comes up over them and they can't regulate them. And I think this goes so very well with Ingrid's work on trauma. And when trauma comes up, we really can't tell the difference, where's this coming from? And we really can react toward our partner in ways that are not very differentiated. And we lose our center in those moments. He also said integration is both differentiation on one hand and linkage on the other. So again, in my own words, it's knowing what my desires are, what's important to me, what my feelings are, who I am, and then separating that out from who you really are. So it's keeping my projections off of you. It's recognizing how I'm interpreting what you're saying, and is it through the lens of my type, or where's this coming from, and is it accurate? So there's really a lot going on. I think that we all project things onto our partner, and I can talk about that later. Okay, I can stop here for now, Ingrid.
Thanks, Michelle. I was just wondering if we could stay with those two quotations for a second and just absorb them a little bit more so they sink in a bit. And I would just invite people here to reflect on times where they've had that experience of staying in oneself, is what I call it, not losing a sense of individuality, like being able to stay in oneself and be at what I call the contact boundary with another person, like being able to show up at the contact boundary in connection and experiencing moments of safety and connection, the ability to be there and have feelings and be present, and at the same time being receptive to the other person's complete difference from oneself and being open to what is emergent in the space between, not needing to have a preconceived idea of the person, maybe seeing them through the lens of type, diagnosing them, wanting to pin them down in some way, only reading for what you can elicit, whether it's security or validation or applause, whatever the hell you're going for in your type. So being able to stay in myself, grounded in the reality of my own life, feeling a sense of intrinsic worth and confidence, an ability to correspond at a nervous system level with the person, self-regulate, all of those things, that are part of staying in oneself, and the curiosity and compassion that I think is part of mutual joining. So that's my kind of amplification of the first quote based on my experience with this work and my own research. And then if someone hasn't differentiated much, they'll be inefficient in how they process information. They may have a flood of emotions that comes up over them and they can't regulate them. So Dan Siegel speaking about integration, that's what it is. There's a higher cortical function that allows us to integrate all the information arising in us. So there's a whole neuroaffective area of research that is about how our very self is a function of our integration of feelings, that through our feelings we develop a kind of proto-self, and then our higher cortical functions are integrating that information, emotional information arising in the body, as well as information from various other channels, what we're hearing, what we're seeing, what we observe around us, what's in our attentional field when we're little, and out of this we're integrating an idea of ourselves. And if we have a lot of trauma, there interruptions and deficits and breakdowns in that ability to integrate in time and space in our own body. So Bessel van der Kolk has spoke about research where he did brain scans on the brains of people who'd been very severely traumatized as children. And what he found is that the parts of the brain that light up when we put in an MRI scanner and asked to reflect on ourselves are offline. So parts of the brain in the medial prefrontal cortex called the anterior cingulate cortex. I don't know about this stuff. These acronyms just stuck in my brain. So if you know about it, great, and you can go and look it up. But those parts of the brain either don't light up or light up very differently in people who've been severely traumatized as children. So the neurophysiological foundation of our differentiation is messed up in childhood, which makes it very difficult to show up in a relationship and stay in ourselves because our very sense of self is kind of scrambled up. And there's desperation, there's please save me, there's please don't hurt me. There are all these sometimes quite extreme ways of relating that are maybe, as Michelle was saying, longing for an undifferentiated safety, but that doesn't work in relationship. So I wanted to add that in. And there, that integration is both differentiation on the one hand and linkage on the other. Again, I stay in myself. I know where I am in space and time. These are my feelings. These are my thoughts. You can't read my mind. Your thoughts are not my thoughts. You have a different reality strategy. You have a different map of the world. You're self-praise dominant. I'm self-praise blind. Really appreciating that someone is radically other, but being in contact with them, being at that boundary. So that's just me kind of amplifying, interpreting, adding a bit in on what I'm seeing here and what I know from the other neuroaffective work. I'm going to hand back to you, Michelle, so we can kind of, just converse about this and see where we go.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on with what you're saying, and I appreciate that amplification. Two things. Number one, certainly the neuroscience is so relevant to this, because when we're in interaction with one another, our past traumas come up, different, we had to repress certain parts of ourselves in order to feel love and value growing up. And so we can project those things onto our partner. We can think that they're thinking something about us that they're not. We can think something about them that they're not. And in my work with couples, I really notice that we don't use inquiry, we use assumptions, and sometimes, just assumptions, and accuse them of things, really, rather than having self-awareness of my own individuality and what belongs to me. And seeing what's coming up is really an indication of something for me to work on, rather than getting stuck in, the symbiosis, the first stage of things, really.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. So I've got a slide I want to show that I wasn't going to show, but I think it talks very strongly to this integration and differentiation thing. And maybe I can put it up. Let me do that. So this is the work that I'm doing in my PhD research on the Enneagram, which is how people use the Enneagram to kind of form a sense of self or to inform the development and growth in their sense of self and selfhood. And really looking at, what does selfhood mean? What does it mean to be in the I versus the ego? And looking at these contrasting states of when we're in the trance of our type and when we are present. I mean, that's Russ Hudson's language. So for me, this is using Peter Levine's CYBAM model here. In the trance of our type, we are kind of short-circuiting. So someone says something, we hear it, we get flooded with feeling. That immediately triggers images and thoughts. We go straight to behavior, we act out. based on our wounds and our trauma. We attribute all kinds of meaning to the situation. You're the baddie, whatever it happens to be. So this is just the slide that I made for type 6. And these are people's quotes from clients and teaching settings. So this is disintegration. This is where we aren't able to integrate left and right brain, amygdala and prefrontal cortex. We're not integrating different parts of the brain. We're not integrating between our feelings and our thoughts. We're kind of disconnected in multiple ways. The other analogy I like to use for how unintegrated we are with our context is that we're kind of having flashbacks. So like a war veteran comes back home, hears a car backfire, that would be a sensation, the hearing, it immediately triggers terror. I'm in the war situation again, and I hide under the table. That's one of Bessel van der Kolk's examples. If we've had childhood trauma, something very small can trigger overwhelm. So I was joking with one of my Enneagram friends about how if we feel unsafe in ourselves, in our bodies, in our nervous systems, because of childhood trauma, and in the 6th example, there's a steady kind of hypervigilance, like a nervous system hyperarousal, walking around on the alert for things are going to go wrong. The person can switch on the kettle in a slightly aggressive way because they happen to be in a bad mood, and all of this goes on. There's sudden flood of cortisol and adrenaline. What's going on? Are they in a bad mood? Do I need to placate them? What do I need to do? There's all kinds of self-molding to try and make the situation okay. It might be ingratiation. Those of you who've got 6, or you probably recognize some of these strategies in yourself of how to regulate. How am I going to restore some sense of homeostasis and safety? So that's what happens when we have the short circuit and the disintegration. And that's when we're trying to establish the fusion again with the person in whatever way. Then we've got our strategy for fusion. It's either going to be merging. In the case of 9, it's false accommodation. It's, oh, it's cool, let's go with the flow. In the case of Enneagram 2, it's let me be super sweet and ignore my own needs. We could go around the whole Enneagram about our strategies. Michelle pointed out that it's the I'm right, you wrong is also a fusion strategy. It doesn't look like one at face value, but if I can get you to recognize my needs as more important and kind of subjugate your childhood needs to mine. That's in Imago, we talk about the power struggle as about whose childhood needs are more important. I find that quite interesting. And then we've got the contrast where we are in ourselves. And there's so many names for this and words for this in spiritual traditions and in people's language whom I've interviewed or spoken with. And in our modalities, like in IFS, we talk about the big S, or the true self, the transcendent self that's able to see all of this happening and not be overwhelmed. In different spiritual traditions, there are different versions of it, the inner witness, the inner eye, authentic self. And these things, we conceptualize these things differently. Sometimes we think of them as having real substance. Sometimes we think of it in terms of a certain kind of attention. So not necessarily making big metaphysical claims, but it's a very different state of being. And when we're there, when we feel the sense of inner coherence and stability, we feel like we've got a stable inner home. That's what Thich Nhat Hanh calls it. When we're here, then we're able to be showing up at the contact boundary. I'm here. I'm real. And I'm in contact with you. We're in a relational field. I'm available to what you're putting forward to me. I'm present, I'm receptive, and I'm adaptable. So I haven't got a predefined formula that I'm imposing, like you have to do this, this, and this to be okay. We're able to be the adaptable adult, as opposed to using our desperate strategy, our childhood strategy, to try and gain some control over the situation, if control is the thing that we're looking for. So this is what I've found. I've collected a whole lot of metaphors and quotes for how people experience these different states of awareness. But I'm pretty sure that every single person here exactly knows the difference between being in that triggered state when our mind is disconnected, we're not really here, we dissociate, we cling, we grasp, whatever the hell we do, we all do something. And then that state of, I'm here. And you here, and we here. And there's a flow and an ease and a nervous system co-regulation without any expectation that the person is like us. So I'll hand it back to you, Michelle. I don't know whether you want me to leave the slide up or take it off or put up another slide, or what would you like to do?
Well, I think this is just such a great demonstration of what differentiation is, as you expanded upon it and give the example of type 6. And I just want to drive home the point of how important it is to manage our reactivity, because that is really what, changes from the one on the left, what you're describing, to be able to go the one on the right, self-awareness, managing reactivity, feeling safe, knowing what belongs to me, what belongs to you, questioning ourselves, what is going on in this moment? Why am I feeling the way I am? So there's different things we can do to sort of bridge coming over to the other side. If I read this list on the other side, if I sit with it, I mean, this is what strong differentiation is really all about over here. And when we're in the trance of our type on the left, when we feel unsafe, I mean, these are all the things that are so habitual that we normally do. And in relationships, we all want closeness, we all want connection, we all want emotional intimacy, physical intimacy. And it's hard for that to exist when we're just seated in our type and when we're doing things that you've described on the left. So we all want the closeness, the connection, the feeling of psychological safety. And it's our inner work that helps strengthen our own differentiation. The stronger our differentiation, the more we align with what you've typed on the right.
Thanks, Michelle. And maybe you can talk about the bridge. I've got ideas about the bridge and practices and somatic embodiment, and all my modalities are very much somatic psychology. Obviously, there's cognitive stuff about being able to filter. Is this true? What assumptions am I making, etc.? So there are different modalities, and some are for different pieces of the puzzle. Like a narrative intervention is, what dots are you joining? You've got a whole story about yourself and this, and so there are different modalities addressing different aspects of the dysregulation. But I'd love to hear from your perspective, what are the bridges that you see? And maybe they're very type specific. For my sense, they largely are quite type specific. But let me hand over to you on that. Like, how do we become differentiated? And I think that's a big chunk of what we're talking about today.
Yes, I think becoming differentiated feels uncomfortable, and that's one of the reasons why we don't do it. One of the things I like to use is inquiry, so asking questions. I'll notice, like, for example, we can observe our partner's behavior and think, you are or are not doing this thing because I don't matter to you. Maybe a 4 might say that, for example. I think a lot of types can say that, but let's say a 4 is saying that. And then one of the things that I do is say, I'll repeat it. Okay, it sounds like you're interpreting your partner's behavior, that you just don't matter to them at all, and your existence isn't important to them. Would you turn to your partner and ask them that question directly? And just check it out and see if that's accurate. And so they'll ask them, and inevitably, I mean, almost always, well, no, of course not. Of course your needs matter a lot to me. Well, then the next question is, well, then why are you doing this thing or not doing this thing? And then to me, that's when the differentiation begins, because now we have this inquiry back and forth about truly learning what is really going on with the other person, and realizing that these were just assumptions on my side. So I like to really slow down. I use a lot of inquiry, and taking turns and if I know somebody's Enneagram type, as Tom Condon says, I might know where to fish. And so I might ask them questions and say, do you feel this way or that way? Do you have this assumption or that? Okay, go ahead and ask that to your partner too. And that is very illuminating. And I look at people's facial expressions. I say, what are you feeling right now? What are you thinking? What meaning are you giving to what your partner just said? How are you interpreting it? And I kind of see, are you taking all that on and are you looking at it through the lens of the trance of your type? And if so, I help them separate out what belongs to you and what belongs to your partner. I always tell people, I think it takes a lot of strength and courage to elicit another person's reality when it's different than yours. It takes a lot of strength and a lot of courage. I don't think that's a weak thing at all. And it's going to be uncomfortable, but there's a really great reward on the other side of it.
Oh, I love that. And I love that you're normalizing and validating the fact that it is difficult to elicit someone else's perspectives, viewpoints, to be receptive to them, because it's a threat to fusion.
It's a threat, especially if they're telling us their truth, but it's about me. They're telling me how something I'm doing affects them or how something I said makes them feel. I mean, the first thing that comes up is reactivity, and a lot of that can have to do with our Enneagram type as well, how we're filtering what they're saying to us.
Very much so. We might feel judged, we might feel shamed, abandoned, and we also don't know what's coming. So we might be very afraid just by opening the space, might feel threatening, like Enneagram 5 can feel so threatened by the unknown and emotional emergence that they quickly want to nail things down, so yeah, it's quite type specific. I find that very much. And yeah, I really like that. Just the normalization of this quite primal fear, maybe an Enneagram 1, when they see that someone else is not complying with their sense of what's going to be safe and good and not chaotic, that's contained, and maybe that person's going to come up with something that feels threatening or even potentially kind of corrupt and bad. Say their partner's got a sexual preference or something that they can't handle. They're going to judge and shame and try and shut that down because they can't cope with what emerges in the space because of their own anxieties. So that I'm grateful for that. And I just want to share the slide again because I want to just point out, you spoke about different elements. I hear quite a cognitive emphasis in the inquiry, like slow down, what are you believing, what are you assuming? Which for me is, there's quite a strong emphasis here in inquiry. What's going on in your mind? What are the images coming to mind? What are the thoughts? What are the beliefs? So there's a very strong cognitive element there of challenging assumptions, the ladder of inference. I don't know if you know Chris Argyris's work, but he speaks about how there's a pool of raw data, but we don't collect data. We interpret based on our pre-existing frame and view and what matters to us. So we might not hear the 10 things the partner says, we only hear that one thing. And then we climb up this ladder of inference. We've made all kinds of conclusions. And based on our conclusions, we then select the things that match our conclusion. And depending on our trauma and our background, we're like, oh, you're just like all the rest, or whatever it is, And so the belief parts is huge, and the thinking patterns. But then also in this model, we're looking at sensations in the body, which is the raw kind of nervous system things that are arising, and noticing our polyvagal state. Are we in co-regulation? How's our breathing? How's our sense of gravity? In the case of Enneagram 6, do I feel like I'm on my axis? Do I feel a sense of inner grounding, or am I kind of falling out of myself? That's more an Enneagram 7 feeling, is like I'm falling forward and out. I'm super conscious of the kind of kinesthetic dimension to it. and where I am in space and time. And then the feelings part, like you were talking about there, also an emphasis, slow down. What are you feeling? What are you feeling? Finding the feelings, tapping into the authentic feelings, and then associated with the imagery and the thoughts, the whole narrative. Like we're joining dots, like, you know, you've never been kind to me. And this is where we often have an always and a never, which is a pretty damaging word. Those two words, as we know from any counseling trainings, the minute you say always or never, you know, you're going to have someone's back up. So handing back to you there, that's what I was kind of hearing.
Yes. And Ingrid, would it be okay if I now showed some more slides? Because I think they go very nicely off of what you just said.
Please, go ahead.
So I think each person can know even what their differences are. I think differences are good. Differences in perspectives are good. I think when you talked about somebody's interpretation, the meaning they give something, their thoughts, I think that can just show up in us and we can't help it. Here it is, but it's what we do with it that's important. Whether we just throw it on our partner, we just run with it, or do we pause? How will they how do two people navigate it? And the nature in which people navigate it is determined by their level of differentiation. And I've seen that the habits of our Enneagram type can sabotage differentiation or affect it, block it, become an obstacle in 9 different ways. And I wanted to go into that just a little bit more here, because I think sometimes when we're in a relationship, we feel so much pain because we are locked into the issue is this, you're this and I'm that, or if you would only stop doing this and doing that, it would be the solution. But what I want to pose is I think the real issue is the lack of differentiation in a relationship, and we don't even know it. So I'm going to break differentiation down into 2 different parts. One of them is self-differentiation, being clear about oneself. Here's where I live inside. So how do I express myself to my partner? How do I ask for my needs? Do I ask for them? Do I ask for my desires? How do I ask for them? Do I say what my perspectives are? If so, how, and what's important to me? It's not yelling this at our partner. It's not demanding it. It's not being judgmental about it. It's an honest, authentic transparency of oneself. So it takes 2 things. It takes knowing ourselves clearly, number 1, and number 2, being willing to share that with our partner, number 2. Now, here's some examples of what it looks like when we're in the trance of our type, when we're speaking to our partner. Maybe we say what our desires are, but it's with a critical tone, like some ones might do. And so we might say shoulds, or, well, everybody does this, and here's why we should do that. But it's really not self-differentiation. It's really not an honest, authentic transparency of oneself. It's really not going the layer deeper beneath it. If ones could really access what's at the seat of it, what's the vulnerable thing? Hey, I long to lean on you. I have felt so heavy burdened my whole life. I long to lean on you, where they're letting themselves in on their partner and they're sharing about that. There's a lot more receptivity, closeness, connection, all the things that we want in relationships that becomes possible. Maybe we do express ourselves, but it's heightened and accusatory, like some 6s can be, for example. And then what that does, it comes across to accusing our partner of things and putting things on them that really aren't true. Maybe there's a grain of truth, but we don't know. And it really doesn't invite an open kind of dialogue between the 2. It doesn't invite a healing conversation when we're in the trance of our type. Maybe we express ourselves, or maybe we don't even express ourselves. Maybe we don't share our truth and what's important to us because we want to keep peace, like some 9s and some other types as well. And then the relationship may feel like it's lacking depth in some way, or my partner doesn't know me. And I think that's legitimate because some of us don't share. We're afraid. It feels vulnerable, and we're afraid to share those things. It could cause a conflict, etc. Lastly, maybe we avoid expressing ourselves because the thought of having needs can cause guilt or something else uncomfortable, like maybe some 2s or some other types. So we're holding back this part. Relationships are both. It's giving of ourselves it's showing, it's exposing ourselves one way, and then it's receiving our partner on the other way, which I'm going to show on the next slide. And the next slide will be I'll stop after the next slide. So the next part is differentiation of our partner. So when we're receiving our partner, this is the meaning we give to their words or their behavior. That stems from our Enneagram types projections or our own self-perceptions, and that determines what we do next in order to create safety or comfort. So to what capacity can we understand where our partner's coming from, truly understand the truth of what they're saying, which usually takes inquiry, asking them questions, even if we disagree, even if we see it differently, not wrong, but differently than where they're coming from. I want to give some examples of how we project. Actually, I'll go through these examples first, and then I'll talk about projection. Now, when I call it receiving our partner, when we're listening, when we're observing their behavior. So when you're receiving your partner, do we get defensive because I hear what you're telling me and it's about myself, but I feel like I'm failing? So like some threes might say, so I'm going to go ahead and get defensive and fire back at what you said. And that we know that doesn't lead to good places. The next one, maybe my partner's talking to me, they're telling me their truth, and I stay quiet because I feel incompetent. You know, maybe I'm projecting that I think you're telling me I'm incompetent, or I just don't know what to say. So I freeze completely. I don't say a word, like some fives might in certain situations. And then their partner thinks they don't care, and it leads to all these other areas in the relationship that aren't true. Maybe my partner's talking to me and I'm hearing what they're saying, but I feel wounded and I withdraw quickly and I shut down because it brings up my shame, like some fours might do. So we miss an opportunity to really understand where our partner's coming from and to heal whatever it is that's coming up. Lastly, maybe we're so forward thinking that we resist hearing this is negative relationship issues. So maybe we're, as some sevens might do, and we change the subject, we do things to not really sit with what our partner's bringing up. So these are different examples of how, when we're in the trance of our type, how that can disrupt differentiation. For example, I'll just talk about the type 3. If I think all I'm hearing is you're telling me I'm failing, that then hijacks the conversation. And we're not differentiated in that moment. Differentiation would look like, ooh, I just noticed this rush coming up over me that I feel like I'm failing. And so what can I do in that moment to know that that's my stuff coming up that has nothing to do with you? And how can I put that aside and manage that and also receive your truth and what that's like? Can I put myself in your shoes and really feel what that must be like for you? Can I feel empathy for what you're saying? Kind of remove my projections out of the way. The last thing I want to say is about projections. I think we can project at least 3 different things on our partner, at least 3. One of them is we can project what our partner needs. So for example, the 8 might say, well, you just need to toughen up, or you need, we project things and we don't really know if that's what they need. And I think, again, it takes inquiry and really separating ourselves out, what's me and what's you. The second thing I think we can project on our partner, or what can come up, is our own self-perception. You think I'm incompetent. You don't care about my needs. You don't think I'm important. You think I'm weak. So I'm jumping around to different Enneagram types as I said that. The last thing, I think, there's at least 3, there's probably more, that I think we can project onto our partner is interpreting their behavior. You didn't stand up for me because you just don't want to have my back, says the 6. You didn't stand up for me because you don't care about me, says maybe some of the heart types. And those things don't lead to healing, closeness, connection, and 2 strong individuals in a relationship. Okay, so I'll stop my sharing at this point.
Won't you
Ingrid?
leave the slide up so that
Okay.
let us
Okay.
absorb. But I
Okay.
just wanted to ask if you can repeat the 3 categories of projection. I think that's helpful. And in the background, I was like joining dots to the object relations and the Hornevian triads and all the things. So if you can just take us slowly through the 3 kind of categories of projection in your sense, whether it's intuition or theory, whatever. I found that quite insightful.
Sure. Yeah, and this is really from watching it come up with couples over and over and over again. So the first one that I've noticed is we project what we think our partner needs. So if I'm an 8, I might think my partner needs to toughen up. I might think that they need tough love, for example. So you just need to do A, B, and C. And it's through the lens of our type. Rather than really asking, hey, what would feel supportive to you? Or what would feel good to you? What can I do that would feel comforting and loving to you, for example? The second one is our own self-perception. We think that our partner, we're hearing, we're receiving what they're saying, and then our own self-perception comes up, and we think they're saying that we're bad, says the type 1. We think they're telling us we're a failure, says maybe the type 3. We think they're telling us that they're not being loyal to us, says the type 6. So our own self-perception gets tacked onto what our partner's telling us, and oftentimes it has nothing to do with what they're saying. And there's not differentiation happening in that moment, because if there was, it would be, okay, I'm aware that this is coming up. Ooh, this is my Enneagram trance coming up. But let me ask you a question to clarify. Are you saying this or that about me? Do you indeed think I'm bad? And I do ask partners to ask that about each other, because it clears up that projection. And it leads into, well, then what do you think? And what are you really saying? Which is where the differentiation can then start to emerge. The third area I've noticed there's projection is when we're receiving our partner and we're observing their behavior. So just one that's fresh on my mind is, just because I think I've experienced them recently with some people, is you not taking a stand. Like for some reason that's a common one that I'm seeing. And an 8 will say, well, you need to stand up to people. You need to do it. And not recognizing that this person is a conflict avoidant type, and it's not as easy as just going ahead and doing it. So maybe they need some support with that. Or you didn't stand up for me because, like I said, a 6, you didn't have my back. You're, not recognizing probably the reason that person didn't stand up had nothing to do with you at all. It's their own internal conflict with taking a stand on something and maybe causing a conflict that's uncomfortable for them. It has nothing to do with you at all, really. Or you didn't stand up for me, you don't care about me, I don't matter to you. And again, oftentimes it really has nothing to do with us, what we're receiving from our partner, and yet we end up taking it personally and we merge it together. It's like my partner's an extension of me. In that way, we make him an extension of ourselves, when in reality, we're 2 separate people. And that's what differentiation is all about. And when we separate ourselves like this, I'll just say this last part, Ingrid, when we separate ourselves about what belongs to me and what belongs to you, it's not growing apart. It's growing closer, actually. Mm-hmm. It's really deepening the relationship.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is powerful stuff. I love these 3 categories, and the examples that you've given from the Enneagram I find incredibly helpful. It very much links to the trauma-informed work that I do, and being a coach as well in the interpersonal space of coaching, the needs, telling someone, giving them advice. It's such an encroachment on someone's autonomy and being. It involves so many one-up assumptions about I know and you don't. And, it's a kind of violation of someone's dignity and autonomy to tell them what they need. And I think people, there's a very valid reaction to that is, no, you don't know. You don't know better. Some people are going to step up to that and resist it, and other people are going to not have the assertiveness or the sense of personal power to assert their own agency in relationships. So there's a long-term like recipe for trouble there. Then on the identity issue side, like attaching our self-perception to what someone else says and inferring they must be saying this about me, and projecting all our shame into the space. I love that there, because in the trauma-informed use of the Enneagram, we really appreciate people's identity wounding and shame, and how much our attributions and our way of speaking to somebody triggers identity wounding and shame, and just trying to be sensitive to that, and grow in, well, owning what's mine, but also I think being really sensitive to someone else's identity trauma. For me, that's a big deal. Is cultivating the compassion that person's 3-year-old or 5-year-old is in the room with you at all times, as your child is in the room, and just being conscious of not really wanting to re-traumatize somebody. So I don't know if you've got anything to say about that. We can maybe get to that in a second.
Just want to flag that Cara's hand is up.
Okay, cool, thank you. And then the last one, the interpretation, receiving and observing as opposed to imposing one's interpretation. And there I want to highlight how toxic the Enneagram can be and how badly it can be abused in an interpersonal space. Whether as a coach, where you're kind of diagnosing and pathologizing someone, telling them, oh, that must be your line to 2, and oh, that's your 6 wing, or oh, because you're a withdrawn type. You know, so we can really pathologize our partner and act as though we know something about them by using the Enneagram. I say this is abusing the Enneagram, because we're assuming that one-up position, like I actually know something about you and I'm going to tell you about yourself now. So I'm both giving advice potentially and interpreting, and in that there's a profound invalidation of someone else's reality. Like, my reality is superior to your reality, and I've got the right to comment on your inner life, as opposed to receiving, like, what is real for you, what is true for you, and making space for the person to be there, as opposed to being told about themselves. Even if it's in positive terms, in the trauma-informed space, we don't do any cheerleading, because we don't want to tell someone who they are, either positively or negatively. So I think I'm translating some of these insights into the interpersonal space as a coach, because that is very much a one-on-one space where we're inviting someone to meet us at the contact boundary with authenticity, but it is a differentiating space. It's like, you there, I'm here, and I'm meeting you in a way that it's totally fine for you to be yourself. That's kind of why I'm here. So I don't know if there's anything you want to say there before we take Cara's insights question, whatever you want to put in.
Yeah, let me just quickly say, I think what you just said is so important, and I want to highlight and underline it, because I think because of the reason you're bringing that up, inquiry is so important. So asking somebody, does this feel right? Does that feel right? Because there's plenty of times when I have a thought that I check out with somebody and it isn't right. And so I always want to know what that person's truth is. And I think people appreciate that too. They want to be seen. They want to be, accurately, their truth to really be out, and not make assumptions just based on their type or their wing or whatever. So we always want to use inquiry, even if we have an intuitive hit or a thought about it.
100%. There's one thing I want to quickly add in there. When you said that thing, what can I do to comfort you? Or what can I do to support you? I want everyone to just notice what happens to you somatically when you hear that question. What can I do to support you? What can I do to comfort you? What do you need right now? What do you need from me? How can I show up for you? All those questions of no advice, I'm here, I'm offering you my nervous system as a resource, basically. I'm offering you my differentiated being and my inner stability as a resource, which is what a parent actually does for a dysregulated child. It's attentive, it's caring. And if it comes from a true place, from the heart, is I am actually caring for you. I'm not manipulating you. I'm not trying to fix you. I'm not trying to show off what an amazing supportive partner I am. I'm actually showing up. And I don't know if it happened for you, but when Michelle said that thing, I felt my nervous system just settling. Even hearing the question, she wasn't saying it to me in a moment where I needed her to, but hearing the question, you can feel the quality of presence that is infused in a question like that if it comes from a sincere, self-grounded place. So I really just wanted to reflect that back, like the nervous system part. So Clara, nice to see you. I'm so glad you're here. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to have this group to explore these things. Yeah, what's coming up for me is that, you know, in this whole realm of like, what can I do to support you? And specifically, like I'm coming from a 3-wing 2, so sort of a more assertive relational frame. And what I find is that oftentimes people are like, well, I don't want to be in relationship with you about this. Do you know what I mean? And with intimate partnerships, I just think it's really interesting because specifically, like there are certain like autonomy types or whatever where so I love how you opened it. It's like really about my spiritual work, because I find all these frames and models and like suggestions to be like super interesting. And then it often comes back to like, can I be with my own nervous system? Whereas I think in intimate partnerships, what I'm longing for is more of this like shared holding of nervous system reactivity. And yet that's another thing in a partnership where people may be like, you know, I'm going to hold myself. I don't, you know, that I can see that in that 3-wing 2-ish, like, hey, I want to know what's going on in your reality. I want to know how to support you. I want to know all of these things, but it's also because I feel better when I can know how you're doing. And so it's a really interesting space to just be like, yeah, like how you're doing, maybe none of my business as your intimate partner, you know? And do you want to tell me how you're doing? And when I'm wanting to know how you're doing, oftentimes that's not for your benefit. It's actually for mine because I'm going to feel better. So I just think that that's like a higher level nuance that it took me a while to see, because these frames are all awesome. And really, they're just for me because most of my partners are completely uninterested in talking about any of these things. And I know that that's why the universe sends them to me. I mean, that's why I have a podcast, so I can just talk to people about these things I'd like to talk to that nobody in my actual life wants to talk about. You know, that's why I have groups, you know? So I just think it's really interesting. And I just would love to hear what anybody else has to reflect back to what I'm noticing.
I love that. Thank you. I love that meta reflection there. And for me, the instant thing that came to mind was the harmonics. And what I found with people with 1, 3, 5, 3, 5, any one of those types dominant, and absolutely, especially if the person's got a 1, 3, 5 tri-type, they try and treat relationships in a technical way, and they want a solutioneer. And when they're asking, how are you? They want information because they want to solve a problem. And it's not a heart-to-heart receptivity. It's, okay, let me just figure you out so that I can make things work. And my clients laugh their asses off when I speak to them about how they might be treating their relationship as a technical problem. And they always say, oh my God, that's exactly what my wife said. You know, and in corporates, you know, yesterday I facilitated a session with a 1, 3, 5 team and talking to them about relationships and connection, and in the stakeholder ecosystem, the importance of feeling, actual connection. And yeah, the saving grace is there. They all want to be better. They all really appreciate, wow, this is illuminating, and they want to do something with it. But I just find that quite funny, the harmonics piece, that we can be solutioneering, getting information as a way of getting a grip on the relationship, getting control and mastery, or in the positive outlook, kind of pretending to be receptive so that we can placate, pacify, smooth over, make everyone happy. Oh, I totally hear you. I hear you. Yes, 100%. I get you. Quickly making things positive. Oh, I'm so sorry. So we're glossing over the actual feeling as quickly as possible, making things happy, and making all kinds of commitments that we aren't even really listening to what we're saying. It's like, yeah, sure, I'll definitely pay attention to that in the future. You know, we're not going to do it. We're just looking for a short-term fix of the mood. Nines going along, yes, absolutely, my love. And then for the emotional realness types, another strategy there of, you know, how to deal with a situation, how to kind of force a person into recognizing your feelings in some way or another. My feelings are the reality. See Michelle smiling and nodding there. So yeah, that was me going off on a bit of a harmonics interpretation of that, what you're saying, Cara. Let me give it back to you. I always like to, you know, am I hearing you? Are you resonating? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm deeply resonating. You know, I ride the 3-6 arrow. That's my line. And that missing piece is 9. And of course, all of my partners are 9s. And so, you know, I love to either fix the problem as a competency type or give space for all of these feelings as the emotional realness of 6. And, you know, it's always very funny that I, you know, I always long to pull my 9s down into this 3-6 zone. And, you know, my spiritual work is to be like, well, maybe we don't need to talk about all of these feelings and just trust that, yes, it's going to go wherever it goes at the end of the day, which may be to relationship satisfaction, or it may be to dissolution of the relationship. You know, it's also even being attached to what happens in the relationship. So, you know, it's really helpful. And yeah, I just love my sweet 9s and keep wanting to learn from them.
Thanks, Cara. Yeah, it's amazing. And we kind of want to pull somebody into our reality strategy. It's like, this is the valid map of the world and how things should be. And these are the coordinates, and reorient your entire being to this reality, because that's what's safe for me. And come along into my trance of type. You know, especially, I mean, as a 7, I know that I want to hype people. I want to like, let's go, let's do some fun stuff, rah, rah, rah. And yeah, Getty's laughing. Oh dear. Can I hand over to you, Fiona? What would you like to say? And then I want to give it back to Michelle to see what's happened for you. Yeah?
Thanks, Ingrid. I'm loving this sense of inquiry and curiosity in terms of the relationship. And so I've one question and one comment. So the comment is around the question of what do you need? And I was fighting for my job at some stage in my career, and there were about 5 of us in the room backing and forthing about who was right and who was wrong. And one of the people in the room was my coach mentor. And she said to me, Fiona, what do you need? And I just burst into tears, because that sensation of I'm at war and I'm fighting, everyone's against me. And suddenly this person stepped into my space, and that compassion of the question threw me so completely that the tears just came out. So I don't even think I answered the question, because it was almost so foreign in that situation, but incredibly powerful. So my question around this is such beautiful stuff. And at the same time, it's a two-way conversation. So we might be stepping into a very conscious, differentiated space, and we might be working with someone or engaging with someone who's not necessarily there, especially in the height of the emotion. So I don't think there's an immediate solution to that, but I thought, let me just put it out there and see what does potentially come up in the rest of the conversation that we're having today.
Yeah, that's right. We can arrive with our best intention and regulate it and think, okay, I've sort of got a grip on this moment. And then we face the other person's wounding and acting out, dysregulation, fragmentation. They might be very wounded. They might have dropped down to like a level 8 or 9 in the levels of health. They're incredibly constricted. They're trying to manipulate us. They're acting out their attachment wounding. Then what? So that's the thing for sure. And this is a good moment to ask Michelle something. What do you think?
Yeah, well, is it okay if I comment on some of the other things and then wind around to this
sure.
question? Okay.
Why don't you take off your slide, Michelle?
Okay.
Thanks. Yeah, go for it. Open. Whatever you
Okay.
want to talk about. No permission needed.
Thank you. I was first going to comment on what Cara brought up and then what you commented on, Ingrid, in terms of where we're hearing what our partner's saying and then we have a certain reaction to it. And an example I have, and this person just happens to be a type 8. This can happen with any type. But he was listening to his heart type partner, and then his response was, it's not going to do her any good if I just listen to what she's saying. I need to straighten out her thinking because her thinking is incorrect. And at that point, the partner burst into tears and said, this is why I feel so invalidated, etc. And so I think I just wanted to share real examples of how this can show up, how we put what we think our partner needs onto them, and how that really doesn't create an environment for what it is that we want in a relationship. We want closeness and we want safety and we want connection and we want to feel like we can say what we want to say and our partner sees us and they care about our needs. That's what we all want in a relationship. But inadvertently, we don't know that things like that really get in the way of it. Then let's see. Yeah, so we want to be able to facilitate an environment and say, what can I do to help my partner feel safe with me? What can I do? How are they going to feel after I say what I'm about to say to them? Now, I know that sometimes words are hard anyway, no matter how we say it, but I think how we say it really matters too. Can we come up from a space of love and connection and really think, how am I going to say this? You know, I think that is really important to think about how we say something. What if we're engaging with another person and we're coming from a good space and they're not? So a couple of things. I think it's good to have conversations with our partner about this when we're both calm and when we are in a good place, and say, you know, here's how I'm envisioning talking through things, and here's my level of self-awareness, and here's what I want to do when I notice that I'm getting reactive. Are there things that you're willing to do too, so we can do this together as a unit, as a united team here? And, you know, what's our plan? What's your plan? What's my plan? Maybe we take some space if one of us is in a place where we're not going to be receptive, we're not going to be able to hear what the other's saying. And we have a plan for being able to calm our nervous system at that point until we can come back again and resume the conversation. So I think it's hard in the moment. Oh, this person's not different. You know, I think it's helpful to have a plan for what we're going to do when that happens.
This is where I see the Enneagram is incredibly helpful. Like, don't chase an Enneagram 5 around the house trying to solve the problem right there and then and demand an emotional response. You are absolutely doomed to fail. Or don't try and drag an Enneagram 7 into the depths of the horror in one go. You know, like, create some space, understand that certain people are not going to want to engage in that way. You know, like, I remember I was in a relationship with someone once, and, you know, I'd planned this lovely evening and the food and and I get this message, we need to talk. And I'm like, oh God, this is the worst. You know, do we have to? Can't we just have a lovely time? Can't we just go quad biking? Can't we go for a hike? I just want to have a nice time. I don't want to talk and talk and talk. Please. No, so with a 7, you would want to actually say, you know, I'd love to have a conversation with you. Is it okay? Can we spend just half an hour? Know that, you know, create some boundaries so that the person knows they're not going to be trapped for eternity in emotional drama. So I think being sensitive to someone else's Enneagram type and what's going to dysregulate them, like for a 6, you don't want to ambush them. You want to be able to say to them, these are the things I'd like to talk about. You know, like map it out, give them some sense of stability and certainty that within the context of this loving relationship, there's some things that, you know, I would really love to share so that you're not destabilizing. I think people can sometimes be quite mean about actually not creating space for the other person's needs in addressing conflict. So I like what you're saying, but let's establish some kind of a plan. Like, please don't follow me around the house trying to solve the problem there and there. Do not hang onto my ankles crying. Please do something else, because I guarantee you that's going to bring out the worst in me. What I need is this. Yeah, so maybe that's already creating too many rules. But I don't know, what is, just giving it back to you, Michelle, in terms of the plan, having a plan for when the heat is on.
Yeah, no, I think what you're saying highlights what Sue Johnson talks about. She talks about in a relationship, 2 styles. When our nervous system acts up, we either pursue and we hold on to the ankles of the person leaving the room because we're trying to manage our anxiety and really attain a feeling of safety. You know, I want to be heard, I want to connect. Or we withdraw, which is, I'm flooded, I'm overwhelmed, I really can't hear what you're saying, I need to take some space. So I think having knowledge about 2 people's different styles, to your point, and then having a plan of, okay, when this comes up and I'm not grounded, and I don't think we can have a productive or healing or, you know, conversation with presence in both of us, then here's what I'm going to do and here's what you're going to do based on our different needs in the moment. If I'm more a pursuer and you're more of a withdrawer.
That's in the Gottman work as well. You get the tortoise who creates the like no, and then there's the person who's the kind of hailstorm in the relationship. And I do see that dynamic in couples quite a lot. And obviously, as you're talking there, I'm also thinking about the different attachment styles. There's the anxious avoidant and the, you know, I don't know if I should maybe put up a slide about attachment styles. It might be a bit much. I think let's leave it for now. Anything you want to say, Michelle?
No, that's it. Yeah, I think attachment is a whole other topic, but yeah, you know, the person who's a pursuer is usually more anxious attachment. The person withdrawing is usually more on the avoidance spectrum, but yeah, I know there's a lot more to say on that.
Let me put up the slide and people can maybe take a screenshot or take it away, because it was part of what I was going to maybe share today, is just being aware of how I am and how I am in relation to the contact boundary. You know, like, am I always there saying, please come and meet me at the contact boundary? Please, please, where are you? Where are you? Or am I like, I'm just going to stay away from there and come and maybe connect now and then? Or, you know, so there are these different attachment styles coming from our different wounds. And how I think about this is how we show up at the contact boundary as an adult. And secure attachment is differentiated when we can come to the boundary, meet the person, respect the fact that they don't really want to be there all the time, potentially. And, you know, their sensitivities and their needs, as well as knowing our own needs and being able to express them at the boundary. So, yeah, if you want to take a look at these things, I think it's very helpful to kind of recognize the roots of one's attachment style and the patterns. No. So I don't know if there's anything jumping out at you on here, Michelle, or how it links to differentiation. I think that might be a helpful thing if you want to reflect on anything around attachment and differentiation. I mean, they're basically the 2 sides of the same coin, right?
I think differentiation is developmental, you know, and we ask things of our partner that we don't realize are developmental for them to do. And I think when we're trying to differentiate whatever it is of speaking our truth, of really hearing where our partner's coming from, that's when our attachment style comes in, because whenever we don't feel safe, then we either, do the avoidant or any one of these. And of course, we're going for secure attachment. Secure attachment and differentiation go hand in hand, really.
Mm. Mm. I think
Yeah.
that
Go
was
ahead.
the key point that for me is, differentiation and secure attachment. Differentiation is not avoidance. It's actually connection, closeness, safety with that individual, groundedness, separation, awareness of this is me, this is where I end and you begin. That allows for security. Anything else you want to say? Any like client examples? What I'd be interested is, we talk about earned secure attachment and that we can develop a secure attachment style. What have you seen in your couples work around the cultivation of secure attachment in the couple space?
I think in order for there to be a secure attachment, a couple things. Number one, there needs to be safety in a relationship. Both people need to feel safe to have a secure attachment. And safety comes from two things. Number one, can I speak to my partner? Can I convey what I'm thinking or feeling in a way that's going to be psychologically safe for them? So I won't be attacking, shooting jabs, sarcasm, but instead an honest sharing, transparency of myself, the self-differentiation. That helps with secure attachment. And then when I'm receiving my partner, can I not tell them on one breath that I want to understand them and hear their truth, but on the other breath, invalidating and dismissing them? Because when I'm doing that, that does not lend to a secure attachment. It really kicks up all these other ones, all these other reactions. So yeah, I think both of those, if two people can work on those, that can really help build a secure attachment together, because both people start to feel safe with each other.
So just repeat the two things.
Yeah, the two things are, well, the big picture is creating safety in the relationship, because a secure attachment cannot exist without psychological safety. And there's two aspects of it. The way I talk to you, the way I represent myself, the way I talk about what I need or what I perceive, can I do it in a way that is kind, and not shooting you jabs, not being sarcastic, not attacking you, but can I do it in a way that's kind, still true yet kind, in a way where you can receive it and you can feel psychologically safe. The second one is, as I'm receiving you, and can I hear what you're saying and it's your truth, but not respond in a way that makes you feel dismissed, minimized, invalidated, wrong, because that's not going to help create a secure attachment.
100%. So I'm hearing there the two aspects of creating safety: how I talk to you and represent myself, and then how I hear you. So it's the kind of two spaces. Thank you. That's great. And the thing that's jumping to mind in relation to this is the Gottman work on the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. I see you nodding there, Getty, obviously something you've come across, that the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse in relationship, I sometimes call them relationship venoms in my workshop. The number one thing that will destroy a relationship is contempt. And if you roll your eyes when your partner's talking, there's probably like a 90% chance the relationship's not going to exist in 5 years' time. Contempt is like the number one relationship killer. Then you've got stonewalling, and criticism and contempt. Defensiveness. So it's criticism, contempt, stonewalling, and defensiveness, which are kind of things that you've mentioned. And for me, that's how you speak, but it's also your body language. Like if someone's talking to you and you go like that, you've just invalidated them, you've shown them contempt, you've shown them defensiveness, and you've kind of shut down to their reality. So that for me, a big deal, and useful to look up. Gottman Research Institute. Getty, anything you want to say about that? You were nodding, and then I want to just see, Raymond, your question, and we're coming close to the end. Yeah?
Just a thought of the toxins, blaming and defensiveness are the terrible twins. And as soon as you go to Enneagram have defensiveness, and you'll see the roles swap at moments between them.
Mhm. 100%. 100%. Yeah. So yeah, all of these different modalities, philosophies, theory, real, attachment theory, they're all kind of saying the same thing with emphases on different parts of the relationship dance. And I'm so grateful, Michelle. What you've shared with us today has been really, really wonderful. And I love that it comes from your experience and your heart and your intuition and your insight, that you're able to articulate these core themes and principles. I'm very grateful for that. You know, it's not coming from a piece of paper. It's very much a real thing that we can feel the depth in what you're teaching. So thank you for that. And Raymond, what did you want to say, Ray? Ray, you there? Your signal is terrible, Ray. Ray, we can't hear you.
Maybe he can type it in. I would love to hear what he would like to say.
Ray, yes, that would be great, Ray, if you can type your comment or into the chat, because your sound is absolutely terrible.
And Ingrid, could I share one thing about contempt? Is that okay?
Yes, please. Don't ask
Okay.
permission.
Okay. I've noticed with contempt, you know, because John Gottman said it's the highest predictor.
Ray, we can't hear you. Your signal's bad.
Okay, let's carry on. Michelle, what did you want to say about contempt?
What I've noticed with contempt is it's not something that happens overnight. So contempt is, and this is coming from my observations, and this is my theory, is it starts out where we're talking to somebody and we want to be heard, we want to be understood. That's our intention. We want to have a connection. We want to feel that. And when that doesn't happen, because of all the reasons that we've discussed today and more, then that hurt or whatever it is turns into anger over time. And when we still can't resolve, then that turns into resentment over time. And when we still can't resolve, that turns into contempt. So by the time somebody's eye rolling, it's coming from a reservoir of pain at that point. And it's a compilation of experience after experience of feeling hurt, overlooked, dismissed, minimized, etc. So I just wanted to say that sequence of how I've seen it happen.
That's really, really helpful. Fantastic. So going from hurt and disconnection to anger to resentment, that it builds up and up until contempt is kind of the tip of the iceberg. And the Gottmans can say this is ending your relationship, but what's actually ending the relationship is years of disconnection, frustration, hurt, invalidation.
That's right.
And then just on that point, like, what do you do when a couple arrives in your rooms and the whole relationship is flooded with contempt? I've had that myself, and it's tricky.
Oh yeah, I mean, and that happens a lot, but unfortunately we tend to wait too long to get help. So it's like, how do you heal the resentment that's driving the contempt and kind of getting to the root of it? To me, I've seen resentment be able to be healed in one of two ways. Number one is being able to talk about those resentments in a way where I'm heard for the first time. So can I hear my partner and how I impacted them inadvertently and the pain that I've caused them inadvertently? This is where differentiation comes in, and it takes a lot of being willing to be uncomfortable, hearing our partner's truth and how my behaviors impacted them and what that felt like. Can I do it in a way where I can feel empathetic and kind to them? That helps heal resentment. The other thing that helps heal resentment is changing the patterns going forward so that we're not continuing to put in the bucket the things that have caused the resentment in the first place. So if we can come at it from both those places, and both people have a part of them that would like to work out the relationship, and it does take time, but that's how the contempt naturally will melt away.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, it's so cool. Healing through, we're talking about and being heard for the very first time. So withdrawing all the projections, withdrawing the assumptions and the judgment, and being able to say, right, I'm staying here and I'm hearing you and I'm choosing to actually hear. And then what I find with pattern changing going forward is, I call it micro experiments. That we choose something very easy and small to start off with, and get the ball rolling. So no big changes. Don't commit to big changes. Try just one tiny thing that is a bid for connection or shows your partner that you've heard them, and establish a tiny bit of safety and connection. Don't make big promises, because it's nonsense. You know, you're going to fail. You set up for failure, and then you add to the bucket of resentment because, oh, you said you were going to do this thing, and when we went to go and see Michelle, he promised to do this, and then he didn't, and he was late again or whatever. You know, so making it incremental, tiny, manageable, so that you don't set the couple up for failure. I don't know what you think about that, if you also work like that.
Absolutely. I think that's where we have to start. And that's how change happens to me. And I ask couples, how do you think change happens? And I include them in that, because to me, change happens by small steps at a time. And I know that that's cliche to hear. And so I will talk about what examples of that can look like, so that they don't just dismiss it because it's cliche, because it really is how change happens. And I think, in fact, if we do things too fast and too big of a chunk, it's not sustainable. It's just going to be temporary and not be something real that lasts.
Exactly. It's a kind of fake show. It's, now I'm going to do this thing that she said she wanted in therapy. And it's not sustainable at all. And it ends up just confirming the other person's worst fear. Renata?
Raymond's back, and hopefully we'll hear him this time. Right?
Okay, let's see, Ray.
It's a quickie. So a couple of, I'm maneuvering at different levels right now. First of all, I just like a bit of plug, because I want to be doing the presentation next Zoom call. So this is like kind of breaking the ice, so that I'm not as nervous as the anticipation builds up. And then also to kind of talk about the thing around attachment in terms of interactional pattern analysis. And you're right, it does kind of feed into a lot of the other theorists. But in terms of, it's almost creating the climate for attachment to actually happen. So creating the climate for closeness. And in terms of the interactional pattern analysis model, it's empathy, but accurate empathy, unconditional positive regard based on Carl Rogers, and then congruence. And these almost like create the climate, as if you were going to be baking a cake. You kind of need to warm the oven up to a particular temperature. So having those three elements allows for the climate for the possibility of attachment wounding to be healed. So it's about creating those three elements first, between yourself, obviously, and your clients, as well as obviously if you're working with a couple, is how do you maneuver for congruence and unconditional positive regard and empathy.
Beautiful.
So that's my little plug for myself for next week.
Beautiful.
And hopefully it kind of helps to framework story around attachment.
That's very cool. So the three things: accurate empathy. So I'm really hearing what you're saying, maybe using your own words and testing, have I understood you? Then the unconditional positive regard. And can you say something more about congruence? I've got my own ideas about what that means, but I'd love to hear what it means in your mind.
So congruence is just that the dots line up. So if I'm trying to create some kind of safe space, what I say and how I say it must line up. So just at that level, there should be kind of congruence. And then also congruence to context as well. So if you're with a client and there's a lack of congruence because the client is maneuvering to be your friend or maneuvering to take control of the relationship, there's incongruence. And then that jeopardizes that climate for you to actually build that that dual attunement, or even build that safe space for tuning into that, where the attachment repair can actually happen.
Absolutely. Thank you. The congruence with context. I really like that, because we can sometimes abdicate our role or get into fuzzy countertransference with our clients, and that erodes the climate for safety and connection. So yeah, that particular piece I really like. The congruence, the dots lining up, what you say, how you say it, what you do. Yeah, thanks a lot. And that I see as a function of differentiation. Like, you can be congruent if you differentiate it, because then your thoughts, your feelings, your actions, your sense of self, you're showing up with an inner coherence and congruence that you can put in the space, and the person's got an opportunity to encounter you as somebody quite solid and integrated. Is that right?
Beautifully said. It just like gave me goosebumps when you described it. Love it. Completely congruent. Love it.
Thanks, Ray. Coming to dinner soon to tell me more. Yeah, okay, brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, great. So, Michelle, I want to hand back to you. Closing thoughts, comments, integration, and I've got your contact details and stuff in the presentation. I'll share the slides. Anything you want to say? And Renata, you were waving. Do you need to go, or?
Just Getty waved, so I waved.
Okay. Michelle, back
Yeah,
to
I would
you.
I think what I'd like to say in closing is, from my both personal and professional experience, how empowering it actually feels to work to strengthen differentiation. I've seen it in couples. I continue to work on it in myself. It's not something we actually land on and now here we are. It's a lifelong journey. And how empowering it is to choose another behavior, to choose another perception, to choose another interpretation, to choose another meaning, to pause and to reflect, and to take something down a completely different path feels so empowering. And so that's I guess, something I want to say about differentiation, even though it's developmental. So that means it's not behavioral. It's not something we can just do with the snap of a finger, but it's a very worthwhile endeavor.
Yeah, I love that. I want to, if anyone wants to go, I want to just share one more thing about that empowerment, because for me, that's the theme at 9. It's the gut center theme. And I want to put up the slides that I had about the gut center. I've got a slide like this on each of the centers that I was thinking of using for this presentation, for this talk, but we didn't do that. So I know in Beach Chestnut work, she speaks about differentiation as the first point on the inner triangle. So you differentiate at 9, then you form an identity at 3, and an orientation at 6, a grounding in truth, whatever. But looking at the agency, the true agency of power that comes from differentiation, is that if I'm differentiated, I don't need to dominate and control you. I don't need to get my way. I don't need to drive over you. I don't need to blend into you and do the false accommodation of 9. I don't need to go with the flow. I'm able to say, you know what, I don't really like that restaurant, and let's not go there, or I'm not in the mood tonight for that. You're welcome to go. I'm going to stay at home and read. Like 9s, struggle to do something like that, and not go with the flow, false accommodation. And then the 8 is called coming on strong. This is the lexicon I'm drawing on from Naranjo. And then the angry virtue of 1, we don't need to do it if we differentiate it, because we're not kind of trying to control anyone. We're showing up in our authentic power, in our aliveness, with a connection to our own healthy instincts, which is part of our differentiation. Is I'm actually connected to my own healthy instincts, and I'm living from my sense of my purpose with aliveness and with dignity, my inherent dignity, my ability to show up and stand in my power, as well as respect that you're over there standing in your power with your inherent dignity and worth. So for me, it's just kind of dawned on me how much differentiation has got to do with standing in ourselves as an entity that has validity, that has power, that has agency, that has will, and the intrinsic worth, the right to exist. For me, is part of differentiation. I've got the right to exist. I've got the right to be here. And attuning to my own aliveness and my own desire, which is also part of the gut center, is what do I want? What do I desire? And how do I express that in a healthy way that is not overriding someone else's will and agency and dignity, and the kind of whole theme of autonomy in the gut center. So I just wanted to bring that in. It was just a kind of connection that got made in my brain. Is there anything you want to say about that, Michelle? I know we're slightly over time. I don't want to gobble up your time. You've been very generous.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'll be quick. Thank you for sharing that. I really love what you said. I agree with all of what you said. And maybe to kind of add compassion to ourselves as a human species in general, because Dan Siegel talks about this stuff goes way back to in utero. And, in terms of differentiation and how these different forces, show up throughout our lives. And we're all in this together. Differentiation is a universal human aspect that we're all kind of grappling with. So can we have compassion for ourselves and for other people as we navigate relationships?
Thank you for that. Let's just all take a moment to take that in, because the Enneagram is a harsh mirror. And yeah, can we just have empathy for ourselves in our human condition, our vulnerability, our insecurity, our need to belong, our wounding, our shame, our anxiety, and just like be present to ourselves for a moment with some genuine self-compassion for that little child inside us that wants to be loved and seen, appreciated, validated. Just bringing a moment of compassion to our own heart. Thank you, Michelle, for that little reminder. Yeah, so I'm happy to stay for a bit as usual. And if anyone wants to chat, reflect, I always love to hear like any light bulb moments or insights, things you want to share from your life. Renata, I know you sometimes want to get moving. So if you do anything, or are you happy to stay for a bit as well?
I'll stay for 5 more minutes. What I want to just let everybody know is that, Michelle, any information about your work or your practice or any events, if you share that with us, I'll send it out on the email list so everybody will have access to whatever you'd like to know, us to know about your work or any opportunities to be exposed to it.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm just quickly putting your details in the chat, Michelle. Yeah, anyone want to share? What's jumping out at you? What's landing? Anyone who feels like staying or asking a question? I don't know if you can stay for another few minutes, Michelle.
I can.
Okay, awesome. Let's hear, what's landing? Thanks, Raymond.
Oh, thank you, Ray. Yes, I agree with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Sam.
Yeah, I was just thinking about, the looking at thinking about the emotional realness piece, and how that makes showing up at something like this really enjoyable for me, because I like hearing people talking about, strategies for connection, being at the contact boundary. But then as a 6, there's kind of a piece that I want to be at the contact boundary all the time with everybody. And that makes sometimes, you know, people who have a different strategy and actually want to be more introverted or withdrawing, it can make, you know, that can be quite anxiety provoking. So it was just really acknowledging the sort of sense that relationship isn't all about intensity of connection all the time. Sometimes it's about, you know, allowing the other person what they need to feel kind of regulated and whole, and the kind of gift of being in a relationship with somebody who has quite different needs than me has possibly allowed me a fair degree of differentiation outside of the relationship, in terms of learning to be self-contained more in my own skin, and let the other person sort of do their thing, and be less anxiously attached, I think. So I probably, yeah, I valued these different ways of sort of thinking through the ways that, in a way, so the kind of relationship that I have, which I enjoy, is not necessarily kinds of relationships that I've had in the past that have felt very intense, very charged and very connected. It's like there are different ways of doing this, I think. And so I was just sort of trying to figure that out as I was, you know, engaging with this space. It's been a very, very interesting afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you for that. That's so cool. When I hear that there's enough safety and connection in the relationship for spaciousness not to be scary.
Yes.
So Michelle, I don't know what you have to say about what Sam shared.
Yeah, same thing. I mean, I think that's, you're highlighting something really important that needs to exist. We all want the connection, and there definitely needs to be that safety. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Deborah, and then Robin.
Sure, it's been such an interesting session, and especially just trying, you know, getting to grips with this concept of differentiation. I think I didn't have the language to think of my previous relationship and what was actually going on, but the idea of giving up but also insisting on I'm right, and the power games that happen with it. And I always thought the problem with differentiation was the person who just gave up their own identity, and yet realizing, I mean, bigger half of me, Michelle, realizing that the person who insists they are right is also having a huge problem with differentiation. And I found that particularly interesting. And so, you know, the things that I've done in the relationship where maybe I don't create safety, or then I don't feel safe. So I love the tips you had around how you give and receive as you engage. Yeah, but the concept of differentiation, and I'd love to try and understand it a bit more, because I'd always thought it would be just the one side and not almost that harsh, everything's right, you know, that dominating power side. Yeah.
Yeah, no, what you're saying is hits home, because I think people who take that approach also feel like they're well differentiated, because they're like, no, I'm clear in what I want, and I say it, and and they do, but it's said in a way that's demanding, commanding, I'm right, you're wrong. And I noticed that there isn't really receptivity for another way of looking at it, for somebody else's subjective truth. There's one objective truth, and it's this one, and you got to come over to mine. But in a relationship, there's two people. So we have to make room for both. And it's difficult for different reasons, regardless of whether whichever approach we take. But yeah.
Robin?
No, what I'm taking away is also connected to this theme of differentiation. And I think what is the compassion that I'm taking from this, in a desire for compassion, a desire to maybe to create clearer agreements in relationship about when to pause. What's really hitting home for me is the object relations piece of this, and a compassion for the fog that that collectively we can fall into when, especially in the early parts of a relationship, when the drugs are worse and it's really hard to see things clearly. And just putting that into an object relations perspective, and going back to the womb, that this is, what was it, maybe like 8 months or so in the womb is when this actually kick in.
That's what Dr. Siegel says. Margaret Mahler talked more about starting at 4 weeks, but same concept from what I understood.
Yeah, that this is that our biological imperative for connection can make things really foggy and make kind of messy. And so the differentiation and the need to just differentiate in a way that sustains that primal biological imperative that we have for connection, for me is something is touching a lot. And so compassion for that. And the other thing I think I'm taking away is like that resourcing of an innate power within us, that doesn't have to make someone wrong, to differentiate, to do it in a psychological way, is also something that, because in my last relationship, which was 6 years, I found myself as a practitioner in a practice called healing shame, I found myself slipping into, the shame as a form of differentiation that just made everything quite messy. So thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Robin.
For these 2 hours.
The fog, and I think that's a really worthwhile thing for each of us to reflect on, is what is our specific fog? Like this person is some kind of ideal. The 6-7, the idealization. The 9 is I'm going to merge. The SX2, I think it's very subtype specific. Is I'm going to possess this person, or whatever we want to elicit from a relationship. I think, what is our version of what you call fog? It might not be fog. There might be a different visual sense for different people. I see that as part of that cyber model, is becoming self-aware of what kinds of thoughts am I having. Like I notice if I'm getting into a relationship with someone, I start having all these fantasies of, anticipating and idealization. I joke with my students, I meet someone and within 5 minutes I'm living in a treehouse in Turkey with them. It's completely and utterly unrealistic. It's ridiculous. So SX7, bam. So noticing the nature of our thoughts, the feelings, the somatic fusion pattern, a regression pattern, as opposed to differentiation. I don't know if you want to say anything about that, Michelle.
Yeah, fog is a good word. I might use the same. I think one of the keys is realizing when we're in that place, and what can we do to differentiate. For me, personally, one of the things that I've started doing that to me is key is paying attention to my body. When I feel my stomach clench, when I feel something going on in my chest, that is an indication. Instead of letting that hijack the situation, can I pay attention to that and see what information I can draw up from it? And that requires taking a space, which is not always easy to do.
Thank you. Anyone else want to say anything? I think we're probably gonna end in a couple of minutes. Anyone want to say anything? Thanks, Renata. Thanks so much.
You. All right. Thank you, everybody, for being here.
Bye.
And thanks for having me. Thank you so much for having me.
We are so grateful. It was so wonderful. Thank you. And it was so lovely. I really enjoyed just flowing and back and forth and not over-engineering a structure to our conversation. So thanks very much for flowing with me.
Absolutely. I thought it worked really well the way we did it,
Enjoyed it a lot. I hope we get to do some more.
Me too. I had the same thought.
Wonderful.
I would welcome
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Let's talk about it and any kind of specific themes. Okay,
Okay. Sounds
brilliant.
good.
Thanks, Michelle.
All right.
Okay, everyone,
Thank
lots
you.
of love. Go well. Ciao,
Okay.
ciao.
Bye-bye.